2009 Mazda 3 with the 16 valve. I believe it's a 2.3. Yep, 2.3. Issue is it's not shifting correctly. There's a local shop, not a dealer, but a local shop in Mountain Home, Idaho, that replaced a shift solenoid in this vehicle, and I'll show you why. So I got the scan tool pulled up, scanned it. I got a P0753 continuous memory and a pending code, shift solenoid A, circuit, electrical. If you look at the freeze frame data, engine temperature is 140 degrees, RPM was 1600, vehicle speed 39 miles an hour, intake temp 55.4 degrees. It ran for 3 minutes 47 seconds. Engine RPM 1600, we already said that. The module TCM 14.19 volts. So I'm getting all this data from the TCM module. So they replaced the actual shift solenoid A, or which is shift solenoid 1, in this transmission. Charged them, I think it was almost 400 bucks. Didn't fix the problem. They're telling them now it needs to go to a Mazda dealer to get the TCM transmission control module replaced. I'm not sure that's the case, so we're going to walk through this and see what needs to be done. Maybe it's a connection issue, wire integrity. We're going to go and take a look at that. But I went into active test here. I can go to shift solenoid A. I can pull up some live data. Shift solenoid 1 is A. So I got to start the engine, low to idle. Go ahead and start it here. Got it started. Might have lost time. So right there, increase. So everything's responding. This is just my live data and my control. Does it mean it's working? We don't know that until we get to the harness and check that out to see what's actually going on. So I went ahead and I looked up the diagram for it. So you got shift solenoid A, which index 6 is your transmission control module harness connector side, just the regular solenoid duty cycle. Pins A and B go on the ground. TCM control module controls that. There's a coupler component, which is just the connector. We're going to get to this harness, check power and grounds, because for this cold to throw 753 shift solenoid A malfunction, it's either got battery voltage or 0 volts when it does the self check, because it's a continuous memory. And you can go through this little fault isolation, but all I'm going to do is check the windings across this, which they already replaced this TCM, or not TCM, the shift solenoid A. Charged them almost 400 bucks, but I'm assuming that's good, but we'll check it. We'll check all the connections going back to the TCM. Take a test light to the TCM, control with the scan tool. Make sure the transistor in there is controlling this accordingly, and then we'll go from there. So we got the battery removed, the battery box, which the PCM is attached to it. We very carefully laid it to the side. And now, if you look down here, there's 3 bolts that hold the TCM on top of the transmission. You can see some bolt holes there. One under this harness, right there, one there, and then one way under there. But there's the TCM. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some checks. What I'm going to do is, hang on. I'm going to, there's the TCM, so it's pin AG. We're going to find that pin. We're going to disconnect this TCM. We can check continuity through this solenoid to ground, make sure it's good, make sure the solenoid's good, the connector's good, wiggle the harness, check all that, and we can also back probe the TCM with a test light, take the scan tool, and give it percentage duty cycle or pulse width modulation, and take our results and go from there. Alright, so they go back home and get some more tools. Got my AES breakout lead kit, my DMM test light, and so forth. I did pull out the transmission control module, the TCM, so this does have a resin coating on it. I'm not saying the TCM is bad, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this back in, and then I'm going to come over to this connector. I don't know if you can even see it in there. Probably not. Probably get the camera in here. Let me see it there. I can't get it in there. Try something different. And well, I'm not gonna be able to show you guys in there, but there's a connector down there, which is this connector here. That goes right into the transmission, or right into the transmission. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna plug the TCM back in. I'm gonna leave this connector unplugged, which is this coupling connector right here, which goes into the side of the transmission. I'm gonna hook a test light up to this and turn it on and off and see if my test light moves. So the actual wiring diagram, this is my TCM. So if you look, AG is the pin from the TCM, which is AG right there. That's going into this transmission assembly. Here's your solenoids in there, shift solenoid A. So I'm going to go to from here, I'm going to unplug this connector here with this transmission control module plugged in, hook a test light up, turn it on and off the scan tool, and that'll either tell me if, I just want to see if it turns on and off, if it's a wiring issue or in a TCM, and we can check the solenoid through all that to ground, and we'll go from there. All right, got the TCM plug back in, battery hooked up, the connector to the transmission, I got it the right pin in there. Breakout lead, test light going to battery negative. I'm going to hook up the scan tool, which is already hooked up. Shift solenoid 1. I don't need any live data. Let the engine idle. I'm going to increase the pulse width modulation. The light should get brighter. You can see the light works. Test light's on. So that tells me that the computer and the wire integrity up to that solenoid is good, unless there's an intermittent wiring issue. So now what we're going to do is actually check the solenoid itself. So I did go ahead and check the shift solenoid. I didn't get it on film, but the shift solenoid is good to go. Obviously it's good to go because the shop, that charger, $400 replaced it, which it didn't need to be replaced. And so I did check that again. That's good. We proved that the wire integrity is all good with the test light. But it's a bad transmission control module. It was testing good when we're filming it, obviously, in the earlier part of this video, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it would act up bad because there's cracked solder joints on this board. It also needs a new capacitor. We took this one off, desoldered it because we're checking it, and this one here was tested bad, so it needs a new cap or capacitor, and there's cracked joints on the solder board. But we took all that potting, adhesive, or RTV off, whatever you want to call it. And this one can be fixed. You can reflow the soldered cracked joints and go from there. But what we're going to do is, I know there's some of these cars at the local junkyard. So we're up to the junkyard, see if we can find one of those, and then when we install it, it doesn't need to be programmed. It doesn't need a J-box, a pass-through device, and it also does not need a PMI or programmable module installation. It just is simply a plug and play. So we'll head up to the junkyard and see if we can find a TCM for this car. Oh, and one more thing. The reason these solder joints get cracked is very common for these cars is because this guy sits in here. There's all that potting in there. Well, this sits on top of the transmission, which gets hot, right? Hot and cold, hot and cold. That's exactly why these modules fail. So I went to a junkyard, got a used TCM. Had to look through like 12, 15 cars, I believe. Every one of them was taken. Finally found one. They are plug and play, no programming required. And no PMI, programmable module installation on this car. I looked in the scan tool. Of course, if you have a engine computer, you'd have to have a JBox for the pass-through the program, along with the PMI, programmable module installation. This one doesn't need it, so I'm gonna go ahead and bolt this thing in and take it for a test drive. So it's all repaired, took it for a test drive, no codes, everything's working great. That means that TCM is good. I did notice the one I got from the junkyard, forgot to mention that it was zip tied up all the way on a brake line on the car, and that's because this one that I got from the junkyard, not this one, but the one I put in the car in the earlier part of the video, was already replaced. Same part number, same mod, ended in a D for Delta, but they had it zip tied out of the way because they didn't want it back on the tranny. They wanted it out of the way of the heat. So they moved it off the transmission. I've noticed that on a few cars where they would do that. So car runs great, shifts great. This one, we could go ahead and we could reflow these solder joints with the soldering station and put the potting back in, and we'd have a spare module. But that is it for this video.